Welcome, everyone. I'm Emily Bertrand. I'm the director of our mid-market business here at Act0. Joining me in today's fireside chat to provide some insight into the threats posed by multi-level extortion and the rise in these attacks we anticipate seeing in 2022 is Will Ehgoetz, a manager here on our threat hunting team. Welcome, Will.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping things for audience members joining us live today. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see three important tabs. The first is the questions tab. Feel free to submit any questions that come up during the talk. We only have about 15 to 20 minutes today, so if we don't end up covering it during the discussion, we will follow up with you afterwards. Second is the attachments tab. This is where you can find links to additional resources on the topic. And then third is the Rate Us feedback tab. So obviously we're focused on delivering real value here. We want to make sure that we're having discussions and conversations that are relevant to you and the problems you're facing. So please feel free to give us suggestions, feedback on the conversation and what you'd like to see next time. So let's dive into it. As if encrypting data isn't leverage enough to extract money from victim organizations, ransomware criminals have been increasingly adding double, triple, and now even quadruple extortion models to their efforts these days. Rather than the relatively simplistic efforts at turning victim downtime into profits that they once were doing, today's ransomware attacks have become layered to the point where attacks don't actually ever need to end. So as ransomware technologies and methods continue to evolve, the attack chains today are looking more like a layered hierarchy of ransomware-based threats, including everything from data theft to denial of service attacks, and most recently, even by directly harassing customers and stakeholders of these victim organizations. So with this shift in multi-extortion techniques, allowing these groups to really maximize profits as they're coming in from so many different angles, we've made the assumption here at Act0 that this is going to be a real area of concern in the coming quarters and years for everyone, small, medium, enterprise organizations. So we wanted to bring in an expert on this to discuss this further. So Will, to start it off, can you talk to us about what gaps in organizations the adversaries saw and began to take advantage of?
Yeah, sure, Emily. I mean, I think the gaps in organizations were the gaps that most organizations have, and that is the ability to get ransomware on their endpoints. So in this particular case, it starts with ransomware as the gap, them being able to get into the environment. The other gap in organizations is the preparedness of organizations, the preparedness to deal with threats like this, to deal with data being exfiltrated and going out the door. To deal with incident response. And lastly, of course, there's also gaps in policies that companies have in how they deal with an extortion. Most companies in IT security are geared towards protecting the network, not dealing with extortion attempts from cyber criminals.
So with these gaps in place, they're coming in, right? They're getting into these organizations. If they get in, what are the different levels that they're taking? What does that chain reaction look like to an organization when they've been attacked, when somebody's taking this multi-level route?
Well, so yeah, first I'll talk about like the different levels of extortion, and there's many. But really what happens is you end up getting a ransom because they've compromised your systems. And if you decide not to pay it, which is the advice, like don't pay ransomware because they just make money off of you, and they might not actually give you your data, then they realized that this was a problem. They weren't getting their money, so they stepped it up to, okay, well now we're going to exfiltrate important company data, secrets, customer information, personally identifiable information. So they stepped it up to releasing threats to sell or to release to the public, to shame companies. And then the next level above that, on top of that, if people still weren't paying, they'd start making additional threats like we're going to attack you, we're going to denial of service your network and organization, we're going to take your services offline, we're going to wreck your web server and things like that. So the chain reaction of an attack really generally looks like an initial compromise from the attackers. Then they do some reconnaissance of your network. They spend a lot of time in there. They move laterally within your organization, getting a foothold in other places to kind of stay and persistence to stay in your network. Once they figure things out, they exfiltrate. They've identified good data that they want. They exfiltrate that. Then they hit you with the ransomware, which locks everything down, and then that whole extortion process starts from there. And I spoke a lot about the escalating level of like the tactics that they're taking, but there's also different levels now that they're doing related to your organization being targeted, where it might be they're going after partners and employees and things like that. And to your last question, the one there about the biggest entry point, it's the same thing we've been seeing attackers getting into with a lot of the attacks these days. It doesn't seem to change. It's phishing emails where people are clicking on malicious links, compromising poorly secured remote access, and also drive-by downloads, web-based attacks as well.
You mentioned they were spending some time in there at the beginning. How long is this taking? Is this happening overnight? Is this weeks, months?
We've seen it, and the industry has also seen it, where they're in there for a month or more at least in many of these attacks.
Long enough to make damage, right?
Find out what they want to find out. Yeah, they take their time. They're more and more like, and I hate the word, advanced persistent threats, right? Like that is the worst word, but people understand it out there. They're operating more like that than traditionally like smash and grab cyber criminal stuff.
So for the folks on the phone, what can organizations do to prepare for this? From like a prevention side of things, how should they be thinking? What measures should they be putting into place?
Well, I think that you need to start with the overall problem and challenges in the organizations, right? There's a lack of visibility in a lot of organizations have on their endpoints and on their network data. They're not a 24/7 operation. A lot of these criminals will hit you on a Friday because they're going to make your life miserable, and they know that you're not prepared to deal with it. You have to understand what your organization has that someone might want to extort in the first place. What is someone going to go after that they're going to maybe release and threaten you with? What are they going to, even just the ransomware level, what are they going to lock down so that you pay them? Is it personally identifiable information, like I mentioned, company secrets, any of those sorts of things? So understanding what the data is, and then securing that data. In addition to securing it, you got to look at backing up the information. So in the event of a disaster like this, you can recover that information. You want those backups to be offline, unavailable to an attacker. And you got to remember, the attacker's been in there for a month, so it has to be recent. The other thing too is things like we provide, endpoint detection response, really helps solve some of the problems, not all of them. It doesn't help solve data loss prevention particularly, and things like that. But EDR helps you get that visibility on the endpoints, helps you control those endpoints, lock things down if processes are kicking off that are malicious or ransomware is hitting, and any of that sort of protection level there, because that is usually the first entry point is your endpoints, your users. And lastly, securing that remote access infrastructure I mentioned. If they're not going after the endpoints directly, they're going after the access into your network, and they're going after flaws in remote access technology. They're going after poorly secured remote access, poorly monitored remote access. So you want to make sure that you have those protections in place as well. Nothing's a silver bullet, nothing's perfect, but if you get that stuff down pretty good, you're at least minimizing your risk.
Do all of those things need to happen for adequate prevention to be in place? Or is there, if an organization is struggling with balancing resources or time or even the effort to get all of those things done, what would be like the one thing that they should focus on?
Oof, that's hard because, and we talk about it elsewhere, and if you secure one thing, you're going to miss something else. So you really need to prioritize it. I mean, understanding your data is really important, but if you had to choose one thing first, it's like securing your endpoints and securing your remote access. Those two things would, and you still need your backups, but most IT shops already have backups in place. It just requires kind of tweaking how it's accessed. So I'd probably say, EDR endpoints and your remote access, because I can't choose one.
But ideally everything.
Ideally everything and more, but again, budget constraints, people constraints, that's all going to be a challenge.
For sure. So an organization has all the right prevention measures in place, what should security teams and analysts on the ground be looking for on a day-to-day basis? And then if something happens, how should the team handle this?
Well, I mean, the analysts on a day-to-day basis, you want to be looking at that EDR data because, again, it's that initial foothold you're looking for. So you want to focus on that malware getting on the endpoint. You want to focus on things like in-memory attacks and people putting malware on an endpoint that they can then spread within your organization for. You want to keep an eye on malicious links or suspicious links, more particularly, that users might be clicking on in phishing emails. You also want to look for things like large data spikes in traffic leaving your network. That could be an indicator of something bad happening.
And then they start to notice something's going on. They uncover that this is an attack. What is the chain reaction now?
Well, I mean, I think you really need to have a good incident response plan in place, and possibly partners in that incident response as well are very important. So you want to, you're going to want to trigger that off. You want to know in that moment that your analysts and your organization are prepared to deal with an attack like this. You may even need to end up having an extortion playbook as well. If it gets to that, most organizations don't have something like that. Because if your incident response plan is for how you deal with this major incident that you're dealing with, this breach, this loss of data, it helps you organize your plan of attack and deal with that with your management and resolving the technical issues. But the extortion side of it, that's a legal side, that's a marketing side, and an executive side of things that most security organizations just don't have something like that, but you need it in a situation like this where you need to understand, what are we going to do if this attack, that's a ransomware attack, turns into something much bigger and multi-level.
Yeah, it's interesting. Coming from marketing side of things, you don't really think about the marketing folks at the table thinking about the extortion playbook, but we have been talking more recently about how while security teams are responsible for this, it is everyone's problem, right? This is the whole company needs to be aware of this and involved in making sure things don't happen and reacting the right way when it does.
Absolutely, and that's really also kind of a part of your IR plan. You really want to have that engagement at all levels of the business, understanding from the business. If you need to pull the plug, you don't need to go through a bunch of hoops to pull the plug to try to minimize an attack. You want to have the authorization to do it right away. And that extortion playbook is just kind of a whole next level of it, because there are companies out there that people can hire to help rebuild their brand after something like this, because in some cases there's companies getting hit a lot, and it can be very damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question before we wrap up is, how do you see MLE tactics evolving, whether over the next year? What does this look like in 2 or 3 years?
Well, I think it's going to become more common, and it's already happening. We're seeing it in the news. Over the past few years, it's evolved. I think from around 2019, they're coming up with new things. It's basically traditional criminal extortion rackets applied in the space of cybersecurity, and they're learning, just like defending organizations are learning as well. So the other thing, the tactics, I don't think they're going to change that much over the next little while, but we're going to see more of these additional things like denial of service, and other threats like that. And organizations are going to need to adapt and focus to those prevention measures. They're going to need to do things like that extortion playbook. They're going to need to look at, okay, what do I need to do to prevent this data being exfiltrated? And that's the defending tactics are also changing at the same time to combat these threats, which is kind of the ecology of attacker defender kind of stuff anyways.
Great. Well, as usual, it's been 15 minutes. It goes by really quickly. Thank you, Will. I really appreciate you taking some time today. And thank you to our audience members. If we didn't cover your question in what we chatted about today, please do reach out at info@axzero.ai. we will get someone from the team to get back to you really quickly. And please, again, don't forget to provide your feedback so we can continue to bring you the conversations that you want to hear. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.